Aloha, I'm Malia Zimmerman, and this is News Behind the News. This is the second show of two which talk about the Broken Trust book, and I have with me the co-authors of the book, Dr. Randall Roth, who's a professor of law at the University of Hawaii, and also Judge Samuel King, who is a federal district judge, and they're both going to share with us some other stories about what happened and what led up to this book that has been a bestseller and has been covered nationally in book reviews. It's an amazing book, and they have donated generously all the proceeds from the book to children's charities in Hawaii. If you haven't read this book, you're missing out. You don't really know about Hawaii until you've read it. But they're going to tell us a little bit more about what led up to them publishing this book, and also what happened in terms of the media coverage of this issue and the coverage of the media that still doesn't exist, that should exist on this issue. So I want to welcome you, and thank you for coming today. Maybe you can tell me about the Broken Trust essay in the first place, or Judge King, you start.
Discuss. See, the justices of the Supreme Court, at least 4 of them, previously, they're not all there now, had said, well, we're going to stop appointing trustees. I took that case to the Supreme Court myself in 1970s. I was asked to handle the appeal when Takabuki was appointed as a trustee. And I argued before the Supreme Court that this was a violation of their position to select the trustees and then actually sit on what the trustees did. Well, they voted against me, but eventually it became pretty obvious, because the justices of the Supreme Court and other justices are selected by are recommended by the Judicial Selection Commission, who sends a certain number of names to the governor, who appoints them. The Judicial Selection Commission is composed of certain members who are appointed by the Chief Justice, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, the Governor, and 2 elected by the bar. And who became trustees? The Chief Justice, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate,
Unbelievable.
and the Chairman of the Judicial Selection Commission. Well, happy.
Well, what did you want the job for?
It's a very happy
$1 million a year?
happenstance.
Yeah, right.
So finally, they couldn't stand the heat anymore, and they decided they were not going to engage in appointing trustees of the Bishop Estate.
Right.
But of course, new judges could change their minds. So I have said that the only safe bet for the Kamehameha schools is to change from a trust to a not-for-profit corporation, which is what Bishop Museum did. There are a lot of angles in it, but the present makeup can lead to the same problems.
So there was terrible corruption in the Bishop Estate, for people who didn't see the last half an hour show. And there was, basically you put all this into the book, the money was being misspent, political people were getting amazing favors and money and money spent on them, on their behalf for their campaigns. And in turn, the Bishop Estate trustees would get legislation passed on for their benefit, their personal benefit, including their salaries.
Prevented.
Right, and most, right. And so then so then you basically got to document this in an essay and later in a book. But maybe you can tell us about getting the essay published. I mean, why did you even need to publish an essay? Weren't there any good journalists in this town?
Randy's the expert on that.
Yeah. You know, Malia, a lot of people, when they think back on the essay that is referred to as the Broken Trust essay, most people think that it was just about Bishop Estate and those trustees. And really, the 5 of us who wrote it, we described it as being about 2 institutions, Bishop Estate and also the judiciary. And we felt that while there were some very obvious, serious breaches of trust by the trustees of the Bishop Estate, we also felt that the judiciary had been corrupted. The judicial selection had been corrupted in large part because of the connection between Bishop Estate and the judiciary. So that was a big part of the essay. When we saw that there were major problems and we wanted to support the alumni and others who were marching, complaining about the job that the trustees were doing, we decided that we wanted this essay to be published in the Advertiser. We did for a couple of reasons. One is that it had much more circulation than the Bulletin, But the other is that I'd been working with the Advertiser for years in conjunction with the Price of Paradise radio show, where our guests would write essays and it would appear in the Sunday morning Advertiser the same time that the radio show was being aired. And I worked with them for about a month and a half, and during a significant period of that time I was trying to get in to see the editor because I had been told that until he approved the essay it simply wouldn't run. I knew his secretary, so it was easy to get into his appointment book, but he canceled 8 or 9 straight appointments. One day I went down and said, I'm not leaving the building until I've met with him. And they laughed, and I said, I'm really not leaving the building. I'm not going to go back to Judge King, Monsignor Kekumano, Gladys Brent, Walter Hennigan, and say, I can't even meet with the guy. Eventually it became clear that they just weren't going to publish the essay. At least that's the conclusion we reached. Gladys Brand in particular said, take it to the Star Bulletin. And I said, well, Gladys, I got to admit, I really want to stay with the Advertiser because I've got this working relationship, and if we move over to the Star Bulletin, I think my Price of Paradise radio show connection is going to be hurt. She said, take it to the Bulletin.
Right.
And of course, that was the end of my relationship with the Advertiser.
So you had your own form of retaliation. When people talk about retaliation, you experienced it too.
Well, we were lucky that the Star Bulletin was there. If it hadn't been there, we think the Broken Trust essay never would have been published. They were there, they published it. A week later, the justices of the Supreme Court wrote a scathing critique of our essay and said that we had been self-sanctified and totally inaccurate and totally unfair. Dickie Wong, on behalf of the trustees of Bishop Estate, wrote that we had gone into the gutter, and he kept calling it the Roth essay, trying to separate me from the other co-authors. And Gaddy himself had very sanctimoniously said he chose not to publish again in the Advertiser because we had refused to give the people that we were criticizing an opportunity to respond to this, which was simply not true.
Well, you were on the op-ed page, so that's what the whole point was,
well,
right?
and the interesting thing is that when all of this came out a week after Broken Trust essay, Gladys, Sam, Monsignor, Walter, and I got together and we wrote a response to each one because they were scathing in their criticism of us, and we wanted people to know what our response was. I took it to the Advertiser that next morning, and a friend of mine who works there said, well, he'll give it to Gaddy, but he's sure it will never run because Gaddy has said his word will be the last on this. And in fact, people who read only the Advertiser in those days didn't even know that we had a response to all of the serious criticism.
So that's not very fair.
Well, it didn't strike us as being fair.
This is how you affect public opinion, by holding out the information.
Right. Well, that still happens, unfortunately, but yours is a magnified example.
My father used to say, your only recourse is to buy your own newspaper.
That's what I did when I started Wire Reporter, so I agree.
Well, and Malia, when you say it's still happening, as you mentioned, this book has been out for about 6 months, and it was at the very top of the local bestseller list for most of that time. We've been told it's been by far and away the biggest seller of all local books this year, and yet people who only read the Advertiser don't even know that it exists.
Because it's been reviewed all over the world, all over the country by some of the top experts in your field and some of the top financial writers and estate writers.
It's been reviewed dozens of times. We've heard from judges around the country, executives of large charitable organizations around the country, a half dozen attorneys general from around the country, trust professors, trust lawyers. We've had wonderful reviews.
But the Advertiser still won't print it.
The Advertiser's news section and editorial page has yet to utter the words broken trust. And it's interesting, when 60 Minutes did a story on the Broken Trust essay, they interviewed Henry Peters and said, Mr. Peters, now that you've been forced out, do you have any regrets? And he said, I have one regret, that I didn't buy the Star Bulletin before they published the Broken Trust essay.
Wow.
If we only had one newspaper in this town, and if it was the Advertiser, well, there wouldn't have been a Broken Trust essay, there wouldn't have been all of the commotion at Bishop Estate, there wouldn't now be a lot of conversation, especially in the Hawaiian community, about problems at Kamehameha schools.
It's amazing the lack of response that you get from people you expect to get it from. You get a lot of good response from people you don't expect to get it from.
Well, part of it, for people that don't understand why the advertiser wouldn't publish this, I mean, there's a lot of pressure put on a publisher in Hawaii because it's a small town, you have a small market. It shouldn't be this way, but the advertisers really have a strong influence over the publishers, and then in turn, a lot of times in publications, that's over the editor. If you don't have a strong-willed publisher and that believes in journalism ethics, and then they'll lean on the editor, who will then lean on the reporters. And I think that's what happens here very often, and why, if journalists were doing their job in Hawaii, would have never needed a broken trust, because they would have been investigating
That's
this
right.
all along.
Well,
and
Meminger wrote several articles, which are on the
this is
Broken
Charles
Trust.
Meminger, right? Charles Meminger.
BrokenTrustBook.com.
Right.
And nobody paid any attention to him.
Right, and so I know he told me personally that he had gotten retaliation for writing those articles, and ended up being a humor columnist now. So he went from investigative reporting to humor, which I guess he has more fun at and has less stress. But there's a lot of pressure put on reporters and editors and publishers by the big boys in Hawaii, and all of them were involved with the Broken Trust, or involved with the Bishop Estate, I believe.
And in Hawaii, because we haven't had as much competition in the political realm as most places have had, we don't have the same kinds of checks and balances that a lot of other places have. And because there was such a tight connection between Bishop Estate and government, with the former Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the governor's surrogate and the chair of the Judicial Selection Commission, there's a concentration of power there. It's a little bit less so now, but especially back at the time of the Broken Trust essay, there was a concentration of power, and people in Hawaii in leadership positions oftentimes didn't want to be on the outs with that concentration of power, that there was a sense that friends get helped, enemies get hurt. And I think the Bulletin, frankly, ran this in large part because they had nothing to lose. They were on the verge of going out of existence, and while it was very risky from their standpoint, and I think there was a lot of integrity to the individuals, Diane Chang and David Shapiro, but as an institution they didn't have a lot to lose, and so that was good. It's a little bit scary thinking that we're relying now on some other organizations to tell us what the news is and to do investigation where it's called for.
Very scary.
Usually at the law school, when a professor writes a book, they have a little party for him,
But they just gave him the cold shoulder, huh?
Randy hadn't had his party.
This is the news behind the news, because I've never heard that before.
Let me add something. In any other community in this country, if a senior federal district court judge wrote a book, even if it was about gardening, that would be news that the judge had written a book. But if a senior federal district court judge co-authored a book about the single most controversial topic, one that involves corruption in the judiciary, corruption in the legislature, corruption in our community. And if you had the kind of turmoil that we had in the 1960s and 1990s over all of this, and you had the current issues that still relate to this and the lack of accountability, if a senior federal district court judge co-authored that and was as critical of the justices as our book is, and had that smoking gun memo described and quoted from in the book, any other community, it would be above the fold, front page, day after day. It would be on everybody's tongues. And here, our morning newspaper has yet to utter the words Broken Trust book in their news or editorial sections.
Wow, or let your side of the story come out, which is remarkable.
They do list it as the top book of the week, but they don't prepare that particular report. That comes from somebody else.
In fact, when we were finishing up the manuscript, I went to the Star Bulletin and asked if I could have access to their photos. We wanted to have a lot of photos in the book. I think we have 75 or so photos. And the people at the Star Bulletin said, well, sure, it's $100 per photo. We do this regularly. And I said, well, all of our royalties are going to early childhood education. They said, oh, well, then you can use all the photos you want to use, no need to pay, and that was terrific.
Wow.
But there were two photos that I'd seen in the advertiser that would have been perfect for the book. I wanted to use those, so I asked, or had my student helper ask the staff person at the advertiser if we could have access to those photos. And without explaining what this was for, the staff person said, well, sure, it's $150 per photo. And my assistant said, well, it's all going to early childhood education. They said, doesn't matter, it's $150 a photo. Well, we thought about it. We thought, well, let's go ahead and do it. It's only 2 photos. So my student assistant called and said, this is a book about Bishop Estate. Randy Roth and Judge King are the co-authors, and we're willing to pay the $150 per photo. She talked to her boss, came back and said, they're not available. We said, well, we'll pay the $150. She said, it's not about money.
Oh, wow. Unbelievable.
And
they
we
won't even
bought
let
that.
you use the photos.
And we depend upon them to
That's right.
bring us the
To
news.
tell us all the news, right.
Yeah,
All the news that's fit to print. Isn't that their slogan?
Well, and you know, we shouldn't pick just on the newspapers, because the political climate or culture that led to all of the problems, and then the larger culture that had the newspaper not investigating it, etc., these are symptoms of a larger problem. We think, Judge King and I feel, that our community should be somewhat embarrassed that it took an outside agency, it took the Internal Revenue Service to get those former trustees removed and to get some changes made at Bishop Estate. I don't think there's any question, but what if the IRS hadn't come in and literally forced the removal of those trustees? The IRS refused to communicate with them and said, unless the court removes them, the trust is going to lose its tax-exempt status and be sent a bill for about $1 billion immediately.
Wow.
Yeah.
The court was finally backed into a corner. It had no choice. It had to remove those trustees. Well, there's something wrong when we can have in our midst a world record for breaches of trust, and it take an outside agency to force some change.
Trust
Right.
law is a esoteric area anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But when Jervis had his unfortunate problems, he
This
was
is Gerard Jervis, who was a trustee at the time.
yes,
Yep.
and he was facing a trial, so he asked the judge to postpone it for a month or what it was, because he was unable to handle his own affairs. But he was able to continue as a trustee. He can't handle his own affairs, but he can handle the affairs of the.
He could still take
He
the
should have been
trustee's
removed
salary.
just like
right,
that.
Right. And he should have, out of courtesy, stepped down if he couldn't handle it, right?
Well, he eventually did.
Well,
Right.
not only stepped down because he was unable to handle his own affairs because of his suicide attempt, but he had been caught by a security guard in the restroom of the Prince Hotel, engaged in a sex act. The other person committed suicide. When one of the trustees asked Jervis if he was about to resign as trustee, he had shamed himself and the trust. Jervis's response to that trustee was, "Why would I resign? These kinds of things happen all the time." That was a trustee of Princess Pauahi's trust.
She must have been crying from heaven, I think. But happy at least to see that there were people that cared and there were people that marched on her behalf, and
That's what made it happen.
also you coming and getting involved, and the other co-authors. And
Well, we were there supporting some real heroes. Had it not been for the individuals who stood up and then eventually the entire Kamehameha Ohana.
Oz Stender, you got to mention him.
Oz Stender's a real hero.
he was a trustee, of course.
Yes.
And Oz knew that he was going to be removed eventually, but he did this anyway. It was the right thing to do. Nona Beamer, Karen Farias, a parent of some students. The students, Sid Gasper and Kamani Kuala'au, one hero after another. And one of the things Judge King and I are particularly proud about is that in this book we tell those stories so that people can see the kind of individual acts of heroism that are required before an entire community will stand up and do the right thing. Colbert Matsumoto, who did a magnificent job as the court-appointed master, he really did a magnificent job. I think in terms of lawyering, nobody came close to the lawyering that he did during his investigation. He said that this book is really about grassroots democracy, a triumph of people coming together, little people coming together and saying to people in power, what you're doing is wrong and it has to change. And we agree.
You know, another aspect of it, there was a group at the school on the faculty who tried to sabotage the printing.
Of your book?
Yes.
You're kidding.
Yes.
Now this is really news
They
behind
wrote
the
to
news. I didn't
everybody
hear
they could
this.
think of, asking them to tell us that we couldn't use their quotes
Wow.
But of course, if they'd said something publicly, we paid no attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to the UH Press and asked them not to publish it.
Wow. And did UH Press publish it? They did, right?
Well, unanimously.
Right. There you go.
Well, in fact, Malia,
Times have changed when you can overcome that.
Yeah.
we have raised some money that has enabled us to offer to the principals of every public high school in Hawaii as many copies of the book as will be used regularly by students as classroom sets used in the classroom. And so far, the principals have requested and we have delivered nearly 5,000 copies
Great.
of the book.
Good.
Well, we made an exception. We started out this was just for the public schools, but we decided we're going to offer to Kamehameha schools free books to be used in the classroom. Thus far, despite our repeated attempts to get a response from them, we have not gotten an answer from Kamehameha schools as to whether they will accept free books for use in the classroom. There's a ray of hope. We got an email from an individual teacher on a neighbor island at one of the Kamehameha campuses, and he asked for some books. I called him up and I said, you know, you need to know the trustees are not real happy with this book, and we're getting some negative vibes from the Oahu campus, and I just want you to know so that you're not blindsided by this whole thing. He said, I know all about it. I want the books
He's
anyway.
a brave man.
Well, he said, it's the right thing to do. The
Good.
kids need to know what happened. We can't be afraid of the truth,
Right.
and I really admire that.
Good. Good.
I have had lots of part Hawaiians and Hawaiians who have read the book say they were fascinated by the beginning. All the part about how
All the history, right? of
Hawaii and then how the Hawaiians were downgraded, and everybody said they're too stupid to do anything except be pole men for the Hawaiian Electric Company. And they just fascinated by that beginning until the schools became really college prep.
One of the things we attempted to do, Judge King felt strongly that this shouldn't be a sermon. The book shouldn't be talking at people. It should be parables, and that we should use anecdotes and help people see just what happened and feel what people were feeling. And one of the things we're most happy about is that Gladys Brandt shows up about every 30 pages. And when she was a little girl living on campus with her Hanai mother, the Howley principal of the School for Girls, Gladys couldn't speak Hawaiian. She couldn't dance the hula, couldn't do anything really Hawaiian on campus. And in fact, when she would go home to her biological parents and her siblings, and her father was the only Hawaiian member of the faculty at Kamehameha schools, she would be pushed out of the room when her grandparents, who only spoke Hawaiian, when they were speaking Hawaiian, she was pushed out of the room.
Oh, that's sad.
She came to the conclusion that anything Hawaiian must be junk.
Must be bad, yeah.
And in fact, she told the story of putting lime juice on her arms and face and going into the sun trying to bleach her skin to make it lighter. And it's through anecdotes like this that we attempt to help readers understand what it was like to be Hawaiian in Hawaii and the role that Kamehameha schools played in that. And then the changes over the years and the Hawaiian Renaissance and what that institution can mean for Hawaiians now. And we believe that that's as much a part of the story as all of the legal issues that were written up so much in the newspapers at the time of the controversy.
Of course, now everybody's trying to get a tan and be Hawaiian, right? now it's better to be Hawaiian.
My youngest son, who was born in Hawaii, once checked off at school that he was Hawaiian, and the teacher thought it was cute and told me about it, and I had a little sit down with him, and I said, Tommy, you need to know we're not Hawaiians, we're Howleys. He said, you're a Howley, I'm a Hawaiian. Everybody wants to be Hawaiian, and rightfully so, because it's such a wonderful culture and history, and to be able to celebrate that, which is why Gladys felt so strongly that we needed to write this book, was that telling the story of what it's been like to be Hawaiian in Hawaii over this period of time was critical for people to understand what it took for the Hawaiians to march on May 15, 1997, and critical to understanding what this institution, Kamehameha Schools, means to the Hawaiians. And we hope that the book has done so.
Right now, there's a time bomb.
What's
And
that?
The decision of the panel of the Ninth Circuit, 15 members, on the appeal from the 3-judge panel that held that the policy of the trustees to require students to have an ancestor who preceded Cook, in other words, pot Hawaiian,
Right.
is unconstitutional or illegal under some other law. They haven't decided that yet. They've had the hearing on June 21st. If it comes out one way, people will cheer on one side and not on the other. If it comes out the other way,
So basically, it's deciding if you have to be of Hawaiian ancestry to go to the school.
have some Hawaiian.
Some Hawaiian, yeah. So we'll
You-
see.
you could
I
have-
think just the fact that the court reconsidered their original decision is a indication. But of course, I'm not a judge. I'm not even a lawyer.
Yeah,
You two are the
well,
experts. But
see, Judge Kay said it's okay,
yeah,
trustees' policy, because it's not in the will.
yeah,
The 3-panel court, 2-1, said it was not. So now it's gone to a en banc of 15 judges.
right.
And that was decided on June 21st, so
So we'll see.
Quick
We'll see.
story, you've commented that I'm an expert on trust law. During the controversy one day when there was a new revelation of the latest serious breach of trust, and the reporter came to see Judge King and me to ask for a quote, and I gave what I probably thought was a brilliant lecture on fiduciary duties, that they had violated this fiduciary duty, that fiduciary duty, and fiduciary duties were so important. And I could tell I had lost the reporter. His eyes had kind of glazed over. And the reporter looked at the judge and said, "Well, what do you think?" And Judge King said, "I don't think those trustees could spell fiduciary."
That's true.
and they couldn't.
And they couldn't. We wouldn't want to think that they were in charge of educating so many children, right?
Except for
Right.
Oz Stender. He was the one
He
person.
was a smart, right? He was a smart.
He knew they were operating improperly.
Well, once again, our 27-minute show has flown by, and I just want to say thank you very much for coming today, Judge King and Randall Roth.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the story about your book. I want to encourage everyone to get it and not to miss out on this. Once again, I'm Malia Zimmerman. This is News Behind the News, and I want to thank you for joining us. Aloha.